Welcome back to the Law and Crime Network. My name is Stephanie L. Willis, and I will be your host today for the next couple of hours. So I'm glad that you joined me. And we're going to have some great guests with us today. We have a former federal prosecutor by the name of Mimi Rocah, and we have criminal defense attorney Mark Eiglarsh. So what we heard this morning is we had some great, there was some drama in the courtroom this morning. What happened was we heard, or what we know, there was a letter written by Mr. Nassar. We're not going to call him doctor anymore, by Mr. Larry Nassar, in which he complained. He had the nerve to have some complaints in regards to having to sit in the courtroom for a period of time and having to listen to the survivors, in this case, discuss or provide their victim impact statements. He specifically said that that the judge was using this as a media circus. And what we do know is that the judge in this case is not shy of providing her opinion. As a matter of fact, we do know that after each survivor impact statement, she has been willing to inform or allow the guests to know that, allow the victims to know that she's heard their stories and that she would place it or allocate their stories into her assessment as to what the sentencing would be. So we do know that as a result of his letter this morning, the judge was far not too happy. She went to the extent of letting him know that she is in fact doing her job, that she does not call the media to come in. As a matter of fact, there are times where she informs the defendant, whether it's a misdemeanor or a felony crime, that there may be media in the room and she might not even know it. But one thing that she did inform, or she did state to Larry Nassar, was the fact that she was doing his job when he was unable to do his. So what we're going to do is we're going to get right to it. We're going to speak to Mark Eiglarsh, and we're going to speak to Mimi Rocah about what was going on in the courtroom this morning, in addition to the tremendous impact statements that we've been hearing from the survivors. And so do we have Mark and Mimi on the line? Hi, Mark. Thanks so much for being with us this morning. I know that
I'm here, Stephanie. I was having a little trouble hearing you. Can you hear me?
And we're having some technical difficulties a little bit. Mimi will be with us in a little while. But Mark, I did want to talk to you about Mr. Nassar here. We have him. He's 54 years old, and his youngest survivor in this case, he had been abused. He had sexually abused at the age of 12. And we do know that these are extreme circumstances. And one of the things that we found here is that although this case is so tremendous, there are so many survivors in this case, but it's not really getting as much exposure through the national media as it should. A lot of some of the survivors in this case have stated that one reason being the fact that it is women who are making these complaints, as opposed to when this Penn State scandal erupted, that made national news media. What do you think about that?
I agree. First of all, we know Sandusky, we know Weinstein, we know some of these other high-profile sexual abuse cases, but this one, I think if you ask the average person, they don't know it. And that's a problem. I applaud your network for devoting its resources to it, but the reason why, that I don't know. I ask producers, it's not sexy enough, maybe because it's women and not boys. I don't know. Either way, I think that everyone should know about this case. Everyone should know this guy's name. They should see his face, and they should have a dialogue in their families about it.
And one thing that we did notice from viewing the survivor impact statements in this case is the fact that a lot of them stated that they informed individuals, or they reported it, and that their reports went ignored. Some even went to the extent of reporting it to their coaches or reporting it to individuals at MSU. But yet we didn't hear about this until September of 2016, when we know that this has been going on for so long. One of the things that we know is that there has been a civil lawsuit that has been filed against MSU, but they're not taking any liability for this. They're stating that they find that they are, of course, that they're not at fault for this and that they abstain from any liability. But 140 plaintiffs have filed a federal lawsuit against MSU alleging that the school violated Title IX. And it also alleges negligence. What, in your experience as a litigator, what I guess allegations would you make in regards to MSU's liability in this case regarding all of these survivors?
Well, if I'm representing the plaintiff, and I've done plaintiff work, I've done civil defense work, let me lay this out for you. They're defending this case as anyone should. I mean, you don't just admit liability, pay out. That rarely happens, especially when, here's the skeptical hat that I'm wearing, you've got civil defense lawyers defending the school. They're not going to resolve this until they've made a hell of a lot of money on this case. They're not going to just, I mean, that's the bottom line. So there's that. Okay, and I'm not accusing these lawyers of doing that. I'm just saying generally that seems to happen. And it certainly happens on cases where I'm representing the plaintiffs and I want to get paid right away and liability is clear. The defense lawyer is like, no, we need to investigate it, we need to do work. That's such crap. Okay. The bigger issue is that the school is saying, okay, these things might have happened, but it wasn't reported to the appropriate people. The other side saying we did. We reported it to the coaches and their heads up. Well, hold on, the school says. Those people don't have the ability to hire and fire people. Mm-hmm. They should have come to administration. Now, if you're rolling your eyes, I rolled my eyes too as a human being. As a defense lawyer defending a suit, let's say, those are the arguments you're going to make.
And we do know that the actual, I believe it was the president, she also knew about it. She received a report and she provided a statement stating that she informed the proper individuals to do what they were supposed to do. However, nothing was done. Do you think that she holds any liability by just simply stating, do what you have to do, and then not following up with it?
The direct answer is definitely maybe. Mm-hmm. I know that's a bit of a contradiction.
Right.
I never make judgments until I truly know all of the facts. I haven't spoken to that woman. I don't know what she knew, what she didn't know. But based upon how you laid it out, it looks like there's some liability there. These aren't the only arguments, though. The defense lawyers have advanced a number of both procedural and substantive arguments. For example, they're saying dismiss this lawsuit because the statute of limitations has run. Mm-hmm. The school, secondly, is immune from civil liability under state law. Third, the plaintiffs failed to file the necessary notices within the statutory guidelines, mm-hmm. and also MSU students.
And Mark, I'm going to cut you off there. I'm sorry for a second, because I want to bring Mimi in just to know what she or have her thoughts as to what's going on or the allegations that were made, because you've made some great points here, taking the defense perspective, Mark, being that the statute of limitations were up. You also mentioned that some of the students were not MSU students. And we have Mimi Rocah here who's with us, and Mimi is a former federal prosecutor. So Mimi, what we're talking about, or what we have been discussing, is the possible liability that MSU holds in this case, any civil liability that they may hold. Let us hear your thoughts on this a little.
Yeah, well, I mean, first of all, I think Mark did make some great points, Stephanie, and you know, I think, and I know Mark was not in any way saying he didn't think MSU should be liable. He's simply presenting the arguments that they're making. It's really shocking. I mean, as you pointed out, I have a little technical difficulty, but as you pointed out in your opening, you know, there are examples now in the press, you know, a really incredible job by the local press. I mean, I think that's something that's interesting that you alluded to. It's the local press that's covering this more than the national media. And, you know, we can get back to that in a minute. But to answer your question, there are numerous reports of girls having come forward and told people at MSU what was happening. And the response they seemed to get over and over was, well, if he says it's medically necessary or medically appropriate, then it is. And I am not an expert on sort of, you know, employer liability law, but I cannot believe that there is not going to be some liability there. I think they're going to, what they're trying to do, I guess, is weed out some of the lawsuits. They're going to try to narrow it down with some of their defenses, some of which are technical about statute of limitations and others. But at the end of the day, there's going to be lawsuits standing, and they're going to have to face some kind of liability. And I think it is hugely important in our society that they do, because the idea that these girls were told, well, if he says it's medically appropriate, it is just unconscionable. And what's even more shocking to me, and again, has just not gotten the appropriate coverage, and I hesitate to say this as a former prosecutor, but what's even perhaps more shocking to me is the fact that law enforcement was contacted over the years. There were at least 2 different local police departments that were contacted that supposedly did investigations, and nothing came of those. I don't believe they were ever referred to a prosecutor's office in one case, and in the second case they were, and no charges were brought. Perhaps as a former prosecutor.
Sorry, Mimi. Wait, Mimi. Let me break in a little bit here, because you made a great point. It is the fact that reports were made to local police. Do you think that any kind of liability could be held on the police department for their failure to report this to the local state prosecutor?
Look, there is, immunity for law enforcement and public actors is a complicated field, and the immunity, with good reason, I think, in many cases, is pretty strong. But I'm saying this almost as, a mother and a layperson, more than as a lawyer. I sure hope so. Because, they're going to argue that they did an investigation. They're going to argue that they talked to Nassar. He gave them this, and how were they to know? He gave them the statement that this was medically appropriate, and how were they to know? But of course, that's just absurd. I mean, you don't need to be a lawyer to understand that.
Go ahead, Mark.
I'm going to say this as clean and politically correct as I can. First of all, I agree with everything that flowed from Mimi's lips, and I was listening very carefully. Everything she says, I agree with. But it's so difficult for me as a father, even as a lawyer, to think that they got specific. So in other words, how is digitally penetrating these women in both of the 2 places that can be done down below? Mm-hmm. How the hell can any law enforcement officer or anyone conclude that that was medically necessary when a girl, hurt her ankle or something?
Right.
It's very hard for me to believe that occurred.
Mark, you're absolutely correct. I don't understand. It's something that many of us will probably never understand. Sticking back to MSU's possible liability in this case, the school is saying that even though it ignored the signs that a serial predator was victimizing young girls, and even though the girls reported the abuse, they are saying that the MSU employees with whom they interacted, the school has no liability because of the way the HR chart is organized. Do you guys have any familiarity with that? Basically, what they're saying is that they reported it to the wrong person. How does that work?
Yeah.
Go ahead, Mark.
Under Title IX, allegedly, they have to give notice to the, quote, appropriate person, right? I mean, if you're abused and you tell, the janitor at the end of the hallway, the school can't be held responsible, I suppose, right? Mm-hmm. So I think this is going to come down to, is telling these coaches or whoever these people told, does that satisfy the requirement? I would like to think yes. I'd like to think they didn't tell the towel boy. They told people, direct people that they worked with who had some authority. School's going to argue, but those people couldn't hire and fire people. They should have gone to administration. And I think it's going to take a court to rule on that issue.
Mimi, your thoughts?
Yeah, I agree with that. I mean, it's not, Mark gave a great example. It's not like they were telling some random person working in the building. They were telling the very people who were entrusted with looking after them. And some of the survivors have made really good points in court in talking about the culture both at MSU and in the Gymnastics Association, in that, the parents were kind of kept out of it. And so these sports, intense sports cultures are, and colleges, universities in general are places where, kids are sort of kept away from their parents. And, that brings back to another point of how anyone could have thought this was medically appropriate when you would, at a minimum, even accepting some absurd notion that this could be medically appropriate, you would need consent from a minor's parent to do something like this. And so I think that they're going to have a really hard time arguing that in a place where they were entrusted with the care of minors, the telling, reporting to people who were supposed to take care of them and look after them and coach them, was not sufficient. That's my opinion.
Okay, so we're going to switch gears a little bit. I know that we were talking about MSU, but now we're going to talk a little bit about Michaela Maroney. Michaela is a two-time medal winning Olympian, excuse me. She's a gymnast, but she did go to the Olympics. And what we know about her story is that she had a settlement with the Olympics in which she signed a non-disclosure agreement in which she could not discuss or she could not make statements regarding the abuse that she sustained by Larry Nassar. As a matter of fact, it was reported that she could have received a fine of $100,000. We do know that Chrissy Teigen, who is married to John Legend, Chrissy Teigen went on Twitter and stated that she would be willing to pay the fine so that Michaela could then make a statement or make a survivor's impact statement. I would like to know, Mark, what do you think about these NDA disclosures that essentially limit survivors from speaking their truth? What do you think about that?
There's pluses and minuses. The pluses in this particular case is we want everyone who clearly has been abused by this monster to speak up, and there should be no limitations, period. Let's go to the other side. The other side is, because I've dealt with these cases, there's a question as to whether, not in this case, but in others, did the person really do what's being alleged? And if they didn't, sometimes they just want to settle the case so that their reputation isn't ruined, so it doesn't become public. I just settled one probably about 2 months ago where to this day, I still believe that my client was innocent, but if the allegations had become public, and they would have if we didn't resolve it, then it would have cost my client millions, and he's very high profile. So then for that person to come back and then reveal publicly what it is she was paid to keep silent over, that would be problematic from that perspective.
We do know and I misspoke, it's actually the USA Gymnastics that she entered into a settlement agreement of $1.25 million, I believe it is. They reached a settlement back in December of 2016. Mimi, your thoughts on the non-disclosure agreement and how it limits essentially what some survivors or alleged victims would be able to say?
Right. Well, I mean, I think this actually presents what should have been an easy case, and in terms of letting the victim survivor out from under that non-disclosure agreement. I'm not sure why it took them so long to do that, in the sense that the circumstances have changed since she entered that in a very dramatic way. He's pled guilty now to a crime. Putting aside the child pornography that was found on his computer, he's pled guilty to sexual assault. And in a criminal court, once that's happened, I just don't, I mean, a non-disclosure agreement just shouldn't have any force. Now, a prosecutor could always use a subpoena to trump that. A subpoena would overcome a non-disclosure agreement, but they shouldn't have to under these circumstances. So I do think it's a little bit different when you're talking about whether someone is permitted to talk after signing a non-disclosure agreement in civil court versus criminal. Although I think in this case, both should be permitted given the change in circumstances.
And we do know that the USA Gymnastics has followed up with that, and after Christy Teigen stated that she would be willing to take or to take on the $100,000 fine if it was so imposed, that they stated that they would not impose a fine on Michaela. So we do know that if she does decide to provide some kind of a survivor impact statement, that essentially she would not be fined for that. But I just thought that that was something very, very interesting to note, that her words essentially could be or would have been silenced. She would not have been able to speak her piece as some of the victims have. But I guess that's the balance that we have in regards to settlement and what can be stated further. I think, Mark, you made a great point in regards to certain situations where individuals may be innocent and that they enter into a settlement agreement to, I guess, outweigh the costs in the future. And I think that's something that a lot of celebrities have alluded to or have discussed a bit, and I think that you made a great point there. What we're going to do now is we're going to throw to a clip of a survivor impact statement so that we can have our guest speak about it a little bit.
First of all, I'd like to thank you for this opportunity to speak. And before I read my statement, can I say something?
Sure.
Up until yesterday, I have wanted to remain anonymous. I have wanted to be able to wash myself clean of all this when it's all over. I know how important it is for me to stand up here today and tell you my story. That is why my husband and I have left our 2 young children at home and traveled here from California. But what I have realized in the last 2 days is that it is also important for me to put a name behind my story.
Thank you. Thank you for traveling and putting the name behind the story. I appreciate that so much.
While playing softball at Michigan State University, I was one of the athletes who had the privilege to be treated by such a well-known doctor. From the first time I walked into Larry Nassar's clinic, I was in awe of the signed photos around his office of Olympic gymnasts that he treated. He was the best of the best. I knew that this was going to be the answer to my back pain. Now today I sit here and I'm so ashamed that I was so naive not to know what was happening to me in this clinic. How dare I be so clueless to believe that this was a legitimate procedure? I trusted this man. I trusted that he had every intention to heal me and give me some relief to the excruciating pain I was experiencing. I had no idea that I was being molested. He was so incredibly kind and friendly to me. He really made me feel like he cared about my well-being, when all he really cared about was using me to fulfill his own sick desires. I am so ashamed that I was so blinded by this disgusting game. It is so hard for me to not feel responsible for the majority of the girls' pain here in this room. If only I would have figured it out. If only I would have understood what was really happening to me and told my mom, my coach, my trainers. I could go on with these if only statements. Trust me, they have haunted me as I've laid in bed every night for the last year. But what I've come to realize is that some of these girls were smart enough to catch on to this disgusting game, and nobody did anything about it. Nobody protected them. So while I beat myself up with these if only thoughts, I now realize they would have probably never even made a difference. But I still can't help but wonder, maybe somebody would have listened to me. This year, since I have found out what was really happening to me in that clinic, has been the most difficult year of my life. Every night I lay in bed and this consumes my thoughts. Every morning I wake up and I pray. I pray that God carries me through the day because I can't do it myself. I don't have the strength or the energy to go on with everyday life with this burden constantly holding me down. Every morning I give the anger, the sadness, the guilt, shame, feelings of mistrust and betrayal. I give it all to God. I take a deep breath, put on a smile, and get ready to face a classroom full of 21 first graders. underneath that smile, there's a flood of tears that I so desperately try to hold back all day long. Sometimes those tears manage to seep out, but I quickly get a hold of myself because I don't want anyone to know how bad I am hurting inside. If they knew how bad I was hurting, they would worry about me. So I hold back the tears and go on with my day the best that I can. There are many days where it all becomes too much, and I just want to run away. I want to go into my bedroom, I want to close the door, and I want to cry. I want to cry out loud. I can't bear to let my parents know how bad I am hurting, so I just tell them I don't want to talk about it. I can't tell you how much it hurts to be a grown woman with children watching your mom and dad cry because they are blaming themselves and wondering what they could have done differently. And the physical pain. I never knew that stress and anxiety could cause so much physical pain. My neck and upper back are literally tied up in knots, causing excruciating headaches and neck pain. When the anxiety gets so bad, there's an ache that takes over my mid-back area. It all sounds so silly to me, but it's real. My doctor says that on top of physical therapy, I need to figure out a way to deal with my stress, because stress is what is causing all the pain and the headaches. If only she knew what I was going through, maybe she would understand. I pride myself on being an excellent wife for my very supportive husband. Unfortunately, this last year, I haven't been the wife that my husband deserves. He has had to walk with me through the darkest days of my life. Our relationship has suffered the last year, from intimacy to me just emotionally unraveling in his arms. He is the one who has had to pick me up. He is the one who has had to figure out how to deal with this broken girl who is so far from the one he married. And my children, I have not had the emotional strength or energy to be the mom that they deserve. Not only have I missed out on time with them due to appointments to try and heal myself, but I haven't been there for them emotionally. They deserve their mom back. They deserve the confident, patient, loving, caring, playful, joyful mom that God has created me to be. Unfortunately, I don't think I will ever be able to completely trust anyone with my children ever again. I'm afraid that this is a scar that will forever be etched in my soul, and will have to learn to cope with it. Some of the best memories of my life took place at Michigan State University. My love for this school has been tainted by all of this. In the last year, every time MSU is spoken of, I cringe. I can't so much as put on an MSU sweatshirt without thinking about Larry Nassar. I pray that someday I will understand that it was only him and a small number of people at the school who are responsible for all this pain, and I don't need to forever hate my school because of these people. I am broken. I'm tired. I feel like the life has literally been sucked out of me. I'm in desperate need of healing. I can't go on hiding behind my smile, holding back the floodgates of tears. It's exhausting, and my loved ones deserve so much more of me. You have caused me and my family a tremendous amount of pain. The only way that I can move on is to forgive you today. I won't continue to let your sickness and bad choices rule over my life. I refuse to let you affect my ability to be the best mom, wife, and teacher that God has created me to be. My husband, my kids, and my students deserve so much more than I have been capable of giving them this last year. They deserve all of me, not just what I have left. No more forced smiles. No more holding back the rivers of tears. No more sleepless nights. No more stressing so much that I have physical pain. No more anger. I give the hurt, the pain, the guilt, the shame, the feelings of betrayal, and the anger to God. Only He can heal this broken girl. I can rest assured that you will be judged someday by someone that is much greater than myself. So I give it all to Him. Unfortunately, there are many more people that need to be held accountable for their actions or lack thereof in this nightmare. They will have their day, and it's at that time I can learn to forgive them. But for now, I can be at peace knowing that you will never hurt another little girl as long as you live. Today, I am asking the court to impose the maximum sentence for Larry Nassar. A statement needs to be made that sexual abuse to our children will not be tolerated and deserves the most severe consequences. Thank you.
Ma'am, thank you for that very powerful statement. I assure you that sexual abuse is not tolerated by this court or this state. I heard in those words that you spoke that really your adult self is yelling at your inner child, why didn't you do something? You know, being a teacher, adults need to step up and speak on behalf of children, and I'm sorry that didn't happen in your case, so you need to let go of that and not feel badly that you should have, could have, or would have done something. You were a child. Now, God placed you in a school. Your voice is heard by thousands of children now, and you have your own, and you're a teacher who can make sure that all children who come in contact with you will be protected, and that's really important. And I think that's really your message today. You are broken no more. You are the voice of victims and potential victims, and you are a strong survivor. Life will be sucked out of him, not you. You are going to continue to grow and have a happy life with your supportive husband who came here today, and your family and your students. You are so strong, stronger than you've given yourself credit for, because if you weren't strong, you could not have read that passionate speech in front of all these people and the world, nor could you have sat down and written it. Give yourself some credit, ma'am. Okay. You are strong. You are getting healthy. You are all together. You are a role model. You are a hero. Thank you for being here.
Welcome back to the Law and Crime Network. My name is Stephanie L. Willis, and you just saw a clip from Carrie Hogan. Carrie Hogan is actually a first grade teacher, and she played softball, and that's during the time in which she played softball over at MSU, that's when she had received, or that's when she sustained the sexual abuse from Larry Nassar. And I said first grader because it is alleged that the youngest victim in this case was 6 years old at the time. So the children that she essentially teaches are around the same age as the youngest victim in which Larry Nassar abused. We still have Mimi Rocah and Mark Eiglarsh on the line with us, or on air with us, excuse me, today. And you saw at the end of the clip that the judge usually makes a statement encouraging the survivor, thanking them for, or thanking her for the statement today, emphasizing how strong the survivor is. We know that Larry Nassar wrote a letter to the court stating that he felt that he was mentally unfit, or not unfit, or mentally unstable to proceed forward, and that the survivor impact statements were going on for too long. When he actually further stated that it was uncruel punishment for him to have to sit in court to listen to these statements. I want to get both perspectives here. So when does enough become enough, or is it never enough? Should the surviving victims in this case have the opportunity, each and every one of them, when we know that there are 140 victims, should they have their day in court? And Mark, I'll start with you.
The answer is absolutely 100% yes. Period, end of story. To deny them the opportunity to get up there and say what they went through would be a miscarriage of justice. If he doesn't want to sit there, well, that's understandable, because who would ever be able to live with themselves if they really knew the kind of impact that they've had on these people. He's destroyed their lives. This last victim, I can't even imagine. Marriage problems, won't be able to trust anyone with her children, anger, guilt, hurt, shame, sadness, betrayal, mistrust. Her exact words were, if people knew how bad I was, hurting on the inside, they'd be worried about me. The ripple effect of what he has done to her is extraordinary. He didn't just destroy her life, it's those around her that are impacted. And we would never have known that but for the court affording her full latitude to be able to express those words. I'm glad she did. And you know what? I don't think that legally he has to sit there and listen. He could say, you know what, I'd like to go, Judge. And I wouldn't be able to listen to something like that.
You made a great point. Mimi, your thoughts on the fact that he technically doesn't have to sit in court to listen to the survivor impact statements. But your thoughts on whether or not this is uncruel punishment, as Larry Nassar stated.
No, the short answer is it's not cruel and unusual punishment. And, you know, I obviously agree with Mark that this is absolutely the right of the victims. It's the law and it's the right thing to do to let them speak. He the defendant can waive his presence in court. He can sit back there in the cell if he wants. You know, I think that would actually be disappointing to the victims. I think this is an important part of their healing process, and it's part of why the law does allow, both federal and state laws allow victims, they have to be allowed to give victim impact statements. And it's, you know, I think it's an important part of our justice system that really both sides can agree on. It may be hard for the defendant, but it's the victim's opportunity to talk about the lasting damage. Stephanie, if I don't want to cut off your line of questioning, but I wanted to address something in particular that she said in her victim impact statement.
Sure. About
her feeling of shame and, you know, sort of what if and why didn't I speak out? And, you know, I think one thing this Nassar case has highlighted that I saw so many times as a prosecutor doing cases about sexual exploitation of children in all forms, both on the internet and in person, is that these are not just crimes about sexual opportunity, sexual pleasure. They are crimes of manipulation. And the predators who engage in these crimes are master manipulators. And, you know, I think almost every one of these survivors has talked about that and talked about how he gained their trust and created this environment and made them think that this was okay. And so I think it's an important point, not just in this case, because this happens every day, and it happens to kids on the internet on a daily basis now, where people manipulate them. And I can't tell you the horrible crimes that we see that really come as a result of manipulation. And it's not until later that victims realize that they've been victimized. And I know that's sort of hard for people to grasp. And so it's easy for some people to look back and, you know, sit back and say, well, why didn't they stop it? Or why did they keep going back? Or why did they keep communicating with that person on the internet? But I don't think people understand quite the degree to which these types of criminals in particular are really master manipulators. So much so that they seem to have, in this case, he seems to have manipulated adults. I'm not saying that they are escaped from liability or responsibility, but, you know, he was able to carry this out for so long in part because he helped make other people part of his scheme.
And Mimi, you brought up a great point in regards to the manipulation and the fact that the victims may not have even realized what occurred. So in speaking about that, do you think that there should be a statute of limitation on these types of crimes? Mimi, I'm going to start with you, and then Mark, you can respond.
So, I mean, look, statute of limitations has a really important role. You know, people obviously in general need to be able to move on with their lives at some point. Recently, I forget the exact year right now, but the federal law was changed to change the statute of limitations for child sexual exploitation crimes to the life of the child. And this is, I believe it was it was definitely in the past 10 years. I can't remember the year off the top of my head, but it was recent, and it was a recognition that, these type of crimes in particular take time to come to the surface for many reasons. One is the reason we were just talking about, which is the people who perpetrate them are such manipulators. They're so good at what they do that often people don't even realize they're being victimized. And the second is that they obviously cause such emotional scarring and turmoil that people may suppress these feelings and the memories and the actions. And some people may not believe that. I know with the Roy Moore episode, there was a lot of talk about, well, why are they just coming forward now? But right. I think a lot of these cases really highlight just how painful it is for victims to have to face this. And in this case, many of them only started coming forward and facing it once they had the strength in numbers, which is completely understandable and a great thing that they have that. So no, I don't think there should be a statute of limitations on crimes like this.
Mark?
Mimi said it perfectly, and I don't want to repeat what she said. The only thing I'll add to illustrate is look at the words of the last victim we just heard. Her exact words were, "I should have figured this out." And then she went on to continue to pull out that stick and metaphorically beat herself over the head because she blames herself, she says, for all these other victims. Had I just figured this out? And just like Mimi said, master manipulators prevent you from figuring it out too soon. With that in mind, as a defense lawyer, I say, no, don't change the statute of limitations. My clients have rights. As a human being and as a father, I say I would thoroughly be in favor of it.
Absolutely. What we're going to do is we're going to go to another clip so that we can hear your thoughts from both of you regarding this next victim impact statement.
When I was 12 years old, I was molested by Larry Nassar during a doctor's appointment for my back. That assault has impacted nearly every area of my life. I did not recognize right away the psychological scars that were planted following the assault, because as a young girl, I was too innocent to even have a category in my mind for this type of offense, and I knew no way to cope. I did not know that sexual molestation was a thing, and I did not know how to tell someone what was wrong. I could not fathom that someone I was taught to trust, a doctor, would intentionally harm me. In the gymnastics community, Nassar was seen as a highly skilled physician that I felt lucky to be able to go see. He was always recommended to me. He was always respected, and he was fully trusted. I went to see him for the first time when I was in elementary school. I walked into his office at Michigan State University, and I saw all the posters he had on his walls that were signed by many world-class gymnasts that I respected, and I was in awe. When I was lying on that table, and he began molesting me with an ungloved hand, despite feeling extreme discomfort, embarrassment, and confusion, I thought I had no right to speak up. I thought, what is he doing? Why isn't he wearing gloves? This is disgusting. Why is this happening? But he was the doctor and I was the child, so he knew what he was doing, and he knew what was best. I did not know how to deal with the conflicting ways in which he would treat me either. I did not know what to think when in one sentence he would be joking around with me, and then the next he would be making inappropriate comments about my body. I walked away from that one appointment with a deeply ingrained sense of distrust, helplessness, shame, and worthlessness. I never talked to anyone about it because I was embarrassed and filed it in my mind as just an uncomfortable doctor's appointment that I wanted to avoid ever experiencing again. Shortly after that, I quit one of my first loves, gymnastics. I look back now and I wish I could scream into the past to myself and say, please tell someone that something is not right. Something is wrong. Over the past years, I have thought of that day often and gotten lost in the replay of the event many times. I watched through the years not understanding why I had so much difficulty trusting anyone and why I had a problem feeling so much guilt and shame. I felt that these things were just who I was. I was often depressed, anxious, and suicidal. I suffered from insomnia and nightmares, and all of these things have caused a strain on my relationships. Larry Nassar damaged the most important relationship in my life, my relationship with my mother. When he abused me, my mother was in the room. And even though I know now that she had no knowledge of the assault, at the time I felt even less power to speak up because I assumed if something were wrong, she would do something about it. He used my natural trust of my mother to manipulate me. He manipulated her as well in the way he positioned me and the trust he built with her over years. How dare you? What kind of a person has the audacity to sexually assault a child in front of their mother? The kind of person who deserves life in prison. Larry Nassar needs to spend the rest of his life in prison for the sake of every child he would ever come in contact with again. We want justice for all of us who are affected by his disgusting crimes. He will not spend his life behind bars only for those of us here who are able to speak out, but also for the children and the horrific images he kept who cannot speak. Larry, you knew what you were doing to us. You're not stupid. You're not ignorant. You were a trained medical doctor. You knew the damage you were causing. But I can barely bring myself to say you were a doctor because you so grossly abused your position. Larry Nassar, you were an imposter of a doctor. I'm still learning what it means to be forgiven and what it means to grant forgiveness. And I'm trying to forgive you while simultaneously not blaming myself for the actions that you chose to take. I do know, though, that while my imperfect forgiveness is probably completely out of reach for you, God's forgiveness isn't. Because every time you abused a child, he wept. He wept for all of his daughters, but he also wept for his son. But it's your responsibility to be the person that he intended you to be. That's on you. I said earlier that I had felt that my inability to trust, my shame, worthlessness, and guilt was just who I am. Well, it isn't. I refuse to be your victim any longer. It is not who I am. My body is my own. My spirit is my own. And I wonder if you realized that when you were breaking and abusing a soft-spoken and innocent 12-year-old, that someday she would be an 18-year-old who would tell her story. And here it is. This is not my shame anymore. It's yours. Thank you.
Thank you.
Your Honor, can I say something?
Yes.
I just
And
wanted...
can I just ask you to state and spell your name?
My name is Lee, L-E-E, Weick, W-E-I-C-K. I just wanted to say, as other parents have, and I know there are many in this room that can appreciate the incredible pain and anguish of parents that my husband and I have felt. We could not protect our child. And I just appreciate so much that you, your court, are starting that healing process by justice happening in the case of Nassar. And you mentioned the enablement beginning to end. And it's beginning, but people have to take responsibility. And the institutions that enabled this to happen have to take responsibility. My husband is a pastor, and in that role, he has a responsibility. We had a young woman in our church come to him and say that she had experienced sexual abuse by someone in our church. And I understand that it's hard. It's incredibly hard to implicate someone that you've trusted, that you know personally, that you consider a friend, a colleague. That is very hard. But that is the role, that is the responsibility. The people in authority who have those roles have to take responsibility, or this will not stop. Thank you. I appreciate you hearing.
Absolutely, ma'am. The voice of adults need to protect those who don't have a voice. I've said it before, I'll say it again. It's children, elderly, anybody incapacitated in any way. And so what I have to say to you is thank you for being here with your daughter, that pillar of strength. She indicates this has ruined or affected your relationship. What I want to say to your daughter is that at every age you need a parent, a mom, a dad, whomever you have, hopefully both. And your mother, like all the other parents, in the room or out of the room, mother or father, did not know. There is no blame here to your parents or to yourself. The blame lies solely with defendant and his manipulation of everybody. So I'm hoping that you rebuild your relationship with your parents as an adult now and keep it open and honest and shout out for any harm you see to an animal, to a child, to an adult, anybody. We need to keep this discussion going. It has made you stronger. I see that. Let go of all those things that you talked about, the shame, the guilt, the worthlessness. You all have that common thread, all of you survivors, but it needs to disappear today because you've taken back your life, your power, your strength, the light that shines in you. God gave you that. He hasn't taken it away. You just set it aside for now. I know judges don't usually talk about God, but I believe in God, and almost every victim, survivor has talked about God. He is here. Sometimes I think he tells me what to do or say, and people think I'm a little bit crazy about that, but I do believe that he's here and has brought all of you here together for a reason, and you will heal together. I don't want you to forget that. And I need you to work with your parents. Can you do that to rebuild? There's no relationship better than that of a child and a parent. It's where you start. I can't thank you enough. You have your power back. He's lost his. I wish you all the best.
Welcome to the Law and Crime Network. We just heard some amazing testimony from survivors in this case, and we heard from a mom and her daughter. Riveting testimony, and actually very sad that we had to hear that. What I do want you to know is that we are getting a live feed from the courtroom right now. We have nothing has started yet, but we will be sure to take you right back into the courtroom once everything begins again at 1:30, because court is scheduled to begin again at 1:30. I do want to mention that closing arguments in Jason King have started, and so you can catch it now on lawandcrime.com. And if you're interested in that case, you can be sure to go and watch the Jason King case and follow up on that. We still have Mimi Rocah on the line with us, or on air with us today, excuse me. Mimi, thanks so much for being with us this afternoon. Mimi, I know that you heard from this last survivor and her mother, and she talked about the relationship that had been damaged between herself and her mother. What are your thoughts on that, if you can talk about that a little bit from your experience?
I'm sorry, Stephanie, I'm not able to hear you.
I think that we are having some technical difficulties. If you can hear me now, I did ask whether or not that you could discuss the relationship between the mother and the daughter in this case that has been essentially damaged, and have you found that in your experience as a former federal prosecutor? I believe that we may have lost Mimi, but we'll be sure to get her back on air once we solve the problem. As I previously discussed, we do have a live feedback in the Larry Nassar case. We previously heard, previously played the clip from Helena and Lee Wyke. Helena was the survivor in this case, and Lee was her mother. Lee specifically stated that people, or the adults in this case, should take responsibility for what Larry Nassar did. And we find that this is a common thread, this is a common theme that has been displayed throughout all of the survivors' impact statements. And as soon as I get the word back from our tech that Mimi is back on the line or back on air, we'll be sure to have her back to answer some more questions, because she has been doing such a wonderful job providing some analysis for us today. We do know that early this morning there was quite some drama in the courtroom, as we did hear that Larry Nassar had provided a letter to judge in this case, and it was pretty interesting what Judge Aquilina stated. And Larry Nassar essentially wrote a letter to the court informing them that he was not happy with having to sit through listening to all of the survivor impact statements, and that he thought that Judge Aquilina's allowing all the survivors to speak was more so of a media circus than allowing the victims to speak their truth. So what we'll do is, being that we have a little more time before court is scheduled to begin at 1:30, we will play that clip so that those of you who did not have the opportunity to see it this morning can catch up.
All right. This morning we had a delay because we were again reviewing, as we did last night, a letter that was sent by defendant. And he states he doesn't sure who to send. I'm not sure who to send this to. I'm very concerned about my ability to be able to face witnesses this next 4 days mentally. Sir, in regard to your letter, which is six pages long, single spaced, printed, I need to ask you a few questions. If you could please raise your right hand. Do you swear or affirm the testimony you're about to provide will be the truth, whole truth, and nothing but the truth under penalty of perjury? Thank you. I need you to speak up. Counsel, that microphone, I know you're hiding it there. Can you return it, please?
Sure. Yes, Your Honor.
All right, thank you. Let me first ask you how you're feeling today.
Welcome back to the Law and Crime Network. I disrupted the video because we do have live feed coming from the courtroom. They have just brought Larry Nassar back in, and I'm so glad that we have Mimi Rocah back with us today. Mimi, what I was trying to ask you previously is that we had a survivor impact statement from two individuals, one from Helena Weick, who is the survivor, and the other from Lee Weick, which is her mother. What I wanted to ask you was, Helena spoke about the fact that the relationship between herself and her mom was damaged. Did you find that frequently, as in your experience as a former prosecutor?
Yes, I mean, it depended obviously on the circumstances of the crimes, but you know, I will tell you, one of the most disturbing cases I saw as a prosecutor was in a small town in Westchester. There was a father who sexually abused friends of his daughter, and filmed it, and then you know, traded that those videos online for, you know, other child pornography. You know, needless to say, the trust in that family, you know, obviously not just against the father who had perpetrated these crimes, but the mother who was also present, not knowing, I guess, about the crimes in any legal way, but, you know, the feeling of, why didn't you protect me? And, you know, we had a case where one of the victims' parents was a prosecutor. And, you know, I think that parent in particular said, how could this be going on, you know, in front of me? And I didn't know it. And again, I think this goes back to a really important point, you know, that is bigger than just this case, though this case is huge in and of itself, but important for all parents and educators and healthcare providers, who want to protect children, obviously, as most do, right. To keep in mind, which is the power of manipulation of these people and these type of predators in particular. And, it's one reason why this argument about this being a sickness, an addiction, like drugs, like alcohol, I'm not saying that there's not an element of that. I come from a family of mental health professionals, so it's not that I don't get that, but I think the difference, one of the distinguishing factors in these types of crimes versus, an alcohol or drug addiction is the degree of manipulation. These are crimes of manipulation more than anything else, I think. And they look for victims who are particularly vulnerable, right? So kids who are going through normal phases of life, that any other kid goes through, of rebellion and wanting to separate from their families or feeling, that they're not being treated well by friends. Those are the victims in particular that these kind of predators really target. They look for them, they find them, they figure out their vulnerabilities, and they manipulate them. And that is something that any law enforcement who's worked on these cases will tell you is the common thread in these cases over and over again.
Mm. And we know that a lot of the survivors in this case have stated that they contemplated suicide, and one of them actually successfully did that. The victim by the name of Chelsea Markham, her mom had to testify on her behalf. And what I want to ask you, and it's sort of a tricky question, do you think that that MSU in this case could have any kind of liability in regards to the suicide of Chelsea Markham because of the fact that she may have committed suicide as a result of the sexual abuse by Larry Nassar?
That's a really interesting question, Stephanie. I don't think there is a short, answer. I think it is something that probably will play out in these lawsuits. And with that victim in particular, because anytime a victim suffers any kind of pain and suffering, emotional, physical, monetary, that's going to be an element in a civil lawsuit. And so here, if they can, in fact, show the cause and effect, which I'm guessing they can, I don't see why it wouldn't be considered an injury, a physical form of injury, the way anything else would be if it was caused by his actions.
Absolutely, and we still have this live feed from the court. We are waiting for court to begin. It's scheduled to begin in about 8 minutes. The judge stated that court would resume at 1:30, and what we're going to continue to do is we're going to watch a little bit more of the clip from Judge Aquilina in this case, because her statements in regards to Larry Nassar were pretty pivotal this morning. So let's take a look.